The CIA's program, known as the Congress for Cultural Freedom, was explicitly created for the purpose of manipulating left-wing artists and intellectuals in order to weaken the influence of the Soviet Union. The CIA's website boasts that this operation was one of its most successful. The CIA's article summarizing the Congress for Cultural Freedom program goes into great detail about how the operation was conducted. To lead the program, Sidney Hook, a New York City Trotskyite professor, was selected. The program involved covertly funding and circulating a publication called Partisan Review, which highlighted intellectuals like Susan Sontag, Irving Howe, Isaac Deutscher, George Orwell, and others. The idea was to cultivate intellectuals and leftists who were critical of Western capitalism, but who strongly opposed anything that would challenge it on the global stage. The website boasts that the CCF program was carried out by a, quote, cadre of energetic and well-connected staffers willing to experiment with unorthodox ideas and controversial individuals if it was what it took to challenge the communists at their own game. Through the CCF program, the CIA covertly funded the work of Jackson Pollock, a painter who refused to depict people, scenery, or even clear shapes, but simply splattered paint onto his canvas. His abstract modern art was viewed as a celebration of Western freedom, contrasted with the propaganda of the Soviet Union in which artists sought to espouse a political message. Among academia, the Frankfurt School and neo-Marxism were pushed forward with the help of U.S. intelligence agencies. Herbert Marcuse, who had been employed by the U.S. State Department and intelligence agencies, became the selected academic spokesperson for the New Left. Efforts were made to portray Stalinism and the pro-Soviet communist parties as authoritarian and out of touch. Sidney Hook is quoted as saying, "Give me $100 million and 1,000 dedicated people, and I will guarantee to generate a wave of democratic unrest among the masses, yes, even among the soldiers and sailors of Stalin's empire, that all his problems for a long time will come from the internal. I can find the people." All right, isn't socialist market economy. All right, writing it down. You're lucky I saw that because I'm reading from a book now. But afterwards, after I'm reading from a book, it'll be much better. All right, so, okay, I can find the people. The efforts to control the revolutionary intelligentsia and separate it from the revolutionary movements across the planet went beyond academia and leftism. Much like the Roman emperors, in order to control their population, imported cults and exotic gods from across the empire. The U.S. intelligence agencies began importing primitive sects from Asia. CIA Director John Foster Dulles wrote, quote, "The religions of the East are deeply rooted and have many precious values. Their spiritual beliefs cannot be reconciled with communist atheism and materialism. That creates a common bond between us, and our task is to find it and develop it." The CIA followed Dulles' instructions, and some of the most primitive Eastern cults were not only supported in Asia as they worked against the Chinese Communist Party, but brought to the USA to flourish among intellectuals who might otherwise have become Marxists. The Dalai Lama's regime in Tibet was particularly repressive, with serfdom, executions, torture, and mutilations. During the 1950s, hundreds of thousands of people died as the United States airdropped Buddhist monks with stockpiles of weapons into the mountains of Tibet to foment civil war against the People's Republic of China. The Dalai Lama's older brother, Gwalo Thondop, was among those who killed communist literacy volunteers and burned healthcare clinics in the hopes of re-establishing the feudal kingdom. The CIA's efforts to popularize the Dalai Lama and his Tibet separatist movement are documented in the book The CIA's Secret War in Tibet, published by the Heritage Foundation. Yet, to many American audiences, the Dalai Lama was presented as a man of peace, and it is leftists and liberals who were among his adoring flock. This is particularly ironic when it is recognized that prior to the Cold War, the Tibetan kingdom was a fetish of right-wing extremists. The book 7 Years in Tibet, considered a sacred text among Western advocates of Tibetan separatism, was written by Heinrich Harrer, a card-carrying member of Hitler's SS. Rightist intellectual Julius Evola and the Nazi regime itself praised Tibetan society under the Dalai Lama's rule for how authoritarian and traditional it was. Tibet's admirers in the 1930s saw the ancient kingdom as one that opposed science and maintained serfdom as the fascist ideal of a natural order. Abhaya Savami was the first of many Indian gurus to be brought to the United States. In 1966, he established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, commonly known as the Hare Krishna movement. The organization actively recruited young peace activists, students, teenage runaways, and other demographics that commonly made up the revolutionary intelligentsia to a far right-wing brand of Hinduism. Many other mystics and gurus who are considered to be far right-wing extremists and fanatical anti-communists in India trickled into the United States. In India, these religious teachings were associated with massacres of Muslims, assassinations of trade unionists, child marriage, and the caste system. These sects generally opposed any effort to correct social injustice, arguing that the poor should live a humble life in the hopes of being reincarnated into a better person. Those who aligned themselves with these most right-wing authoritarian elements in India were carefully selected to become the favored teachers among peace activists and left-wingers in the United States. The Hare Krishna movement became a staple of anti-war rallies. In addition to anti-communist politics and Eastern cults, the use of narcotics has become an aspect of left-wing activity in Western countries. Revolutionary movements around the world always fought to liberate working people from the horror of addiction. Wiping out the scourge of heroin and opium is one of the Chinese Communist Party's greatest achievements. The CPUSA forbid its members from using drugs, and many socialist organizations in U.S. history even discouraged the drinking of alcohol. Marxists have generally seen drug addiction as a horrific scourge of capitalism, in which those who turn to substances in order to numb their pain. Marx famously compared religion to opium, saying it is the heart of a heartless world and the soul of soulless conditions. However, covert efforts by the U.S. government aimed at cultivating a synthetic left and preventing the rise of any effective socialist movement reversed this long-standing position among Marxists and socialists. During the early 1960s, the CIA launched a program called MK Ultra and began to conduct experiments and distribute hallucinogens to college students. In many young places where young people were opposing the Vietnam War, marching for civil rights, LSD, marijuana, heroin, and cocaine always seemed to be present. Dr. Timothy Leary, a fired Harvard psychology professor, traveled across the United States urging young people who protested the Vietnam War or marched for civil rights to use narcotics. His slogan was "Tune in, turn on, and drop out," and he became a national figure, speaking on many college campuses and appearing frequently on national television. On August 17, 2010, the retired Fidel Castro devoted one of his columns in Cuba's daily newspaper, Granma, to quoting from Lithuanian writer Daniel Estulin. Castro's column describes efforts to subvert leftism in the United States. Quote, "Both in the United States and in Europe, the big outdoor rock concerts were used to stop increasing discontent among the population. According to recently released CIA documents, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, Alan Dulles purchased over 100 million doses of LSD, almost all of which flooded the streets of the United States during the 1960s. Thousands of graduate students served as guinea pigs. Soon, the overwhelming majority of anti-war protesters went into Students for a Democratic Society on the basis of outrage at the developments in Vietnam. But once caught in the environment cultivated by the Tavistock Institute's psychological warfare experiments — the Tavistock Institute, by the way, was a British intelligence psychological research center set up in Britain, and it still exists, the Tavistock Institute for Social Research — their sense of values and their creative potential went up in a cloud of smoke. That's Fidel Castro, folks. That was a Fidel Castro column. The Malthusian concept of overpopulation and the belief that scientific progress is an affront to Mother Nature has also slipped into leftist discourse. While environmental problems and climate change are certainly a reality, The answer is obviously more scientific progress, not less. New sustainable energy sources must be developed and utilized. The economy must be controlled. Can religion play a revolutionary role? Religion. Writing it down. The economy must be controlled in order for resources to be used in a logical way in line with long-term plans, not the short-term interests of individual capitalists. However, this is not the belief of most activists who call themselves environmentalists and ecologists. Rather than calling for a rational state-run economy and scientific progress in order to overcome global warming, the dominant voice, do you know anything about Osho? Osho, hippie, New Age. Writing it down. All right. Rather than calling for national or a rational state-run economy and a scientific progress in order to overcome global warming, the dominant voices in the green movement tend to look backward. Among leftist circles, one often now finds the belief that human beings are a cancerous tumor on planet Earth eating up precious resources. The neo-Malthusian voices that speak up in the name of environmentalism now call for drastically reducing living standards in the human population. Many great infrastructure projects in the name of developing the world have been stopped in the name of ecology. One of the central beliefs of many within the current that can accurately be described as the synthetic left is a rejection of historical progress. While the political designations of left and right can be traced back to the French Revolution and the very concept of historical progress itself, so much has been distorted. This distortion is not accidental, but has been documented as the result of intentional work by intelligence agencies. That's the synthetic left. That's the section on the synthetic left, the small section on the synthetic left in my book, City Builders and Vandals.